Every year, a handful of research institutions rank every country on Earth by how democratic it actually is. Not by opinion, not by which party is in power, by data. Hundreds of measurable indicators track the same way, for every nation, going back decades. In 2026, 3 of the most respected of these institutions published their findings on the United States, and the numbers surprised even people who follow politics closely. This isn't a video about who you should vote for. It's about what the data says, and where America now actually ranks, according to the people whose entire job is measuring this. Let's start with the oldest and most widely cited of the 3, the Democracy Index, published annually by the Economist Intelligence Unit, the research arm of the Economist magazine. This index scores every country on a 0 to 10 scale, based on 60 different indicators grouped into 5 categories: electoral process and pluralism, the functioning of government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. It's been running since 2006, which means there's nearly 2 decades of consistent comparison to draw from. Wikipedia. In the 2025 edition, released this year, the United States didn't just decline, it fell 6 places in the global ranking, dropping to 34th place worldwide, with its score slipping from 7.85 down to 7.65. To put 34th in perspective, that's below most of Western Europe. It's below Canada, which actually improved this year, climbing to 9th place with a score of 9.08. The gap between the 2 North American neighbors is now wide enough that the report specifically calls out the contrast. The EIU attributes the American decline mainly to worsening scores in 2 specific categories: the functioning of government and civil liberties. Those aren't vague concerns, they're 2 of the 5 hard categories the index actually measures, and here's the part that might surprise you most. The United States has technically been classified as a flawed democracy, not a full democracy, every year since 2016. This year's decline pushed it deeper into that category, but the shift out of the top tier isn't new. Most Americans have no idea that classification happened nearly a decade ago. The second index comes from the Varieties of Democracy Institute known as V-Dem, based at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. This one goes further than most. It draws on 32 million data points and input from more than 4,200 scholars and country experts across 202 countries, making it one of the most detailed democracy measurement projects in the world. V-Dem's language in its 2026 report was unusually direct. The report states plainly that the speed with which American democracy is currently being dismantled is unprecedented in modern history. Here's the headline finding. For the first time in over 50 years, V-Dem classified the United States as an electoral democracy, rather than a liberal democracy, a formal downgrade in category, not just a lower score. What's the difference between those 2 terms? An electoral democracy still holds free and fair elections. A liberal democracy goes further. It requires strong checks and balances, protections for individuals against the power of the majority, and real constraints on government overreach. According to V-Dem, the US has kept the first but lost the second. To measure how far that decline actually goes, V-Dem's data placed American democracy at roughly the level it measured back around 1978. That's not ancient history, it's a benchmark inside living memory for many Americans, which is part of why the finding got so much attention. It's worth noting, V-Dem's report wasn't just about the US in isolation. Multiple expert measures placed the United States among the leading examples of contemporary democratic backsliding among wealthy, long-established democracies, a group that also includes recent cases in Hungary and Poland, but at a scale researchers say hasn't happened before in a country with America's wealth and institutional history. Now here's where it gets more complicated, and more interesting. Freedom House is the 3rd major organization that tracks this, and it's been doing so since the Cold War. Its 2026 global report carries the title, The Growing Shadow of Autocracy, which sounds just as alarming as V-Dem's findings. But Freedom House actually reached a different formal conclusion. Despite the negative report, Freedom House did not formally downgrade the United States. The country remains in Freedom House's free category, the same top-tier classification it's held for decades. Why the disagreement? Freedom House and V-Dem use different methodologies and weight different factors. Freedom House's report focused heavily on something specific, the Trump administration's rollback of programs that historically promoted democracy abroad, including the shuttering of the U.S. Agency for International Development and cuts to global media agencies, which the report argues weakens democratic institutions internationally more than it changes America's own internal classification. So you have 2 respected decades-old institutions using 2 different sets of criteria, arriving at 2 different formal verdicts. one says downgraded, one says still free but declining. That gap matters. It means the honest answer to, is America still a democracy, depends partly on which specific definition of democracy you're using. So, where does that leave things? 3 major indexes, 3 different scoring systems, 2 of them, the EIU and V-Dem, recorded formal downgrades. 1, Freedom House, held the US in its top category despite a critical overall report. What virtually every researcher agrees on is that the next real test comes at the ballot box. Every one of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives is up for election in the 2026 midterms, along with a third of the Senate, and multiple reports point to this election cycle as the next major data point these organizations will use to measure whether the trend continues, stabilizes, or reverses. For now, the data is what it is. America hasn't left the category of democracy by any measure, but depending on which of these 3 respected indexes you ask, it's either fallen further than at any point in decades, or it's holding on to its top ranking by a much thinner margin than most people realize. Either way, the numbers are lower than most people think, and that's exactly why it's worth understanding what they actually measure, not just the headline. Before going further, it's worth being clear about what these reports are not saying. None of these 3 organizations claim the United States has become a dictatorship, that elections have stopped happening, or that voting no longer matters. Researchers specifically note the US has not, so far, replicated the full-scale, violent authoritarian takeovers seen in other historical cases of democratic collapse. Some experts also point to specific reasons America is less likely to fully collapse into authoritarian rule than smaller nations that have gone through this. They point to deep structural advantages, a large economy, long-standing institutions, federalism, and an active civil society, as factors that have historically made full democratic collapse less likely in wealthy established democracies. At the same time, researchers caution that those advantages aren't guaranteed protection. Rising inequality and political polarization can weaken them over time, meaning the resilience is conditional, not automatic. There's also a bright side buried in the EIU's report that rarely makes headlines. 2025 actually marked a pause in what had been 8 straight years of global democratic decline, with about 3/4 of countries worldwide either holding steady or improving. The United States was described as one glaring exception to an otherwise stabilizing global trend.